I'm Anton, and I'm a climatologist, and chances are you might be too. Climatologists sit at the intersection of business and nature. They want to play a key role in minimising the human-led impact on the environment, but they also understand the realities of living and working in a modern, capitalist world. So if you too have pondered how we get to a future where clean, regenerative policy is embedded with profitable business models, the climatologist movement may just be for you. In this series, I'll be proving that climatologists are already out there leading the charge to marry their own good businesses with sustainable climate principles.
As a business, a key way to increase the bottom line, attract better talent, and bolster your branding is to engage in environmentally focused community efforts. Now, it's not surprising considering that 75% of millennials are willing to take a pay cut to work for a company that's environmentally responsible. We know brands like Patagonia have successfully built a rock-solid reputation by aligning their business with environmental causes that speak to their community of customers. I talk about this concept of community and environment with Jo Taranto, co-founder of Good for the Hood, where she shares how 5 for Ride, Jo's community initiative aimed at reducing single-use plastics in her neighbourhood, it didn't just change how people thought about waste, but transformed how local businesses operated.
It was an incredibly powerful way of just getting that awareness and getting people to start thinking about it at a very local level.
By joining an initiative focused on doing good for their community, local cafes not only helped the environment, but attracted new customers and boosted their sales. Jo summed it up best. When you work with the community, the results aren't just good for the environment, they're transformational for your business. So whether you're a big company or a small cafe, partnering with your community on sustainable initiatives can fuel long-term success and make a real difference.
Lean into the things that you enjoy. Life's too short to hate this, so you should at least get a little bit of joy at the same time as doing some good.
Stay tuned for my chat with Jo on all things climate and opportunity.
Jo, welcome to Climatologist.
Thank you so much, Anton. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So, Jo, you've had an intriguing career path from occupational therapy to aged care to grassroots campaign, tackling single-use plastics and beyond, which hopefully we'll get into. Can you tell us about why you initially chose a career in health?
Yeah, I remember having that discussion as a teenager with my mum and she said to me, choose something you're passionate about. And there was only 2 things that I really felt passionate about, and one was animals and the other is people. I just love being with people. I'm a huge extrovert, massive talker, big hugger, and I don't know what that translated to a career. I looked at vet science, realised that you have to kill a lot of animals to be a good vet. It didn't really fit well with my sensitivities. So I realised that a health career is a great way to be with people, to talk to people, to help people. So I pursued that and I loved it for a period of my life. It was everything. It was everything I was passionate about.
So helping people, that nexus between helping and people, tell me about that.
I think there's, a lot of people call it sort of altruism or, being a do-gooder, and I own that. I absolutely think that I was sent here to do good, and if it's just to make myself feel good, then maybe that is, I don't know, but I feel like there are worse ambitions to have, and being with someone in their hour of need and helping them with just the simplest things, and that's what OTs do. They can help with really practical, tangible things. There's a very immediate recognition of the benefits. People can immediately feel like they're having success. There's more control, there's more, empowerment, independence. That's a pretty good feeling. And over time, you really feel like you're actually tangibly making a difference. And there's not too many jobs that you can see that day in, day out. So it's pretty powerful stuff.
It is pretty powerful. That concept of empowerment, I think, is actually a thread that we'll come back to. So I'm really glad we started on that. OT, so occupational health, occupational therapy and aged care, how did you move from that to environmental and sustainability?
I think a lot of it came out of, it was just time. I think I didn't really plan it, and you might get that sense from my career that I haven't really planned any of this probably particularly well. It's just been the vibe at the time. I had kids and I moved states. I was moving from Melbourne up to Sydney, and I became a mum. And anyone who becomes a parent will tell you that it does change you. If it doesn't change you, I want to know what you're doing, because it transformed me. It transformed my outlook on myself, the world, and I had a really strong sense of eco-guilt and eco-anxiety. And I think that is a pretty universal experience for a lot of parents these days. A lot of people even questioning whether they should have kids in today's changing climate. But I felt like I got that after. It's not something I'd really thought about. Climate change is not a conversation that I was very active in before that. But as soon as I had kids, you start having all those feelings about what would life be like when they're teenagers, when they're 20. And then I realised that when they were my age, my son will be, I think, 42 in 2050. And, you start to go, well, that's the decade that we're all looking at. And he's going to be starting his family and looking at his career, and what the hell have I done? So I definitely had that moment of that, do I just ignore that feeling? Do I push it away? Or do I embrace it? And I think I went in pretty hard. But yeah, it was definitely not a plan or by design.
So you acted on instinct, it sounds like a little bit. That's amazing.
Impulse.
Impulse or instinct. Both like some of those things. Intuition, however it plays out. That's right, the vibe. So what did it actually look like?
Yeah, so I guess the context for all of that at the time was that I had been through a pretty tumultuous few years before having my second son. I had multiple miscarriages, so I'd been through probably a period of what I would call sustained grief. And I think grief is an emotion that anyone who works in climate is pretty comfortable with. We acknowledge that there's a fairly strong sense of loss and the fear of loss. And I think having had that experience as someone who lost, through miscarriage, I really had a strong sense that was kind of linked to the way I was feeling about the world more broadly. So it was a bit of a weird landscape to be considering a career change at the same time, because I was pretty raw. And I was also, after I had my son, then going through a divorce. My marriage didn't survive at the same time. So it was a really shitty time to change career as well. But I did what I think a lot of people do when they're a bit lost, is I looked to my community, and I had a really beautiful neighbour, Karina, who said to me, "You've had some of the worst years that I've seen people go through. What would you like to do this year?" And I actually said to her, I remember the words coming out of my mouth and thinking, I'm an idiot. I said, I really want to start a fruit and veggie co-op. That's my ambition for, 2016 or 2017. And she's like, that's it? And I'm like, yeah, that would just be really satisfying. So we did that. That was in the first 2 months of the year.
Wow.
And then she's like, okay, what now? And I was like, I don't know. I'm really interested in what's happening with single-use plastics, and we were doing a lot of work in the creek behind our house. And when I was really struggling, I used to go down there and put out weeds and plant trees and get involved in bush care. So it became sort of my go-to place. And she said, well, why don't we just do some cleanups and do some things? So we started doing a lot of outward-facing, really small grassroots things in the community. And I didn't know it at the time, but Karina was kind of my coach and I guess just my cheerleader. She would say, you should do that. That would be great. And it got to a point where we were really active and really busy in our community and doing some really fun things together just for the joy of it. And I just felt like it was a new part of me just coming out, and I felt there's something in this for me. So we started there.
So you leaned on your community, your neighbour. You started being active in the community, and then you started to activate your community. So this concept of community activation is a pretty recurring theme. What did that look like?
So Karina was studying user experience design at the time. She's an amazing digital creator. She's worked in advertising, marketing. I had none of those skills. I'm the person who liked doing and helping. But this was a whole new world for me. So she used her user experience design training to work with the community. So she would literally go down to parks and talk to people in the parks about waste, about litter and things, and I would tag along. So I was learning through her lens, and at the same time I was having all these conversations and getting people's names and getting volunteers. So we were really just getting people, and a lot of people were feeling all the things that we were feeling. We were obviously just really activated. So we, from all of the information that Karina pulled together and that we got together, we realised that there was room for something in our area. That it wasn't the community that didn't care. It wasn't that people weren't interested in this. It was just that, nothing, was there that community could kind of grab onto.
What's a tangible step?
Yeah. So we thought, well, if we gave them something that was hyper-local, very solutions-focused, then maybe that's something that could be a nice experience for them. It would help us dip our toe into this a little bit more. And I didn't know it, but it really was a crash course in, grassroots activism, but also future sustainability communications, which is where I found myself. So, so we started a campaign in our area of Ryde in Sydney, and it was called 5 for Ryde. And it was 5 things that you could do in the community to help reduce single-use plastic and litter. It was very much focused on the tangible waste elements that you would see in the community. So the plastic bags, the coffee cups, the water bottles that were the most heavily littered items. And it really was a waste avoidance. It was talking about reuse. It was jumping on some of the other big campaigns that were happening in Australia that were starting to get really good traction. And we were able to mobilise quite a lot of cafes, a lot of volunteers. We held heaps of cleanups. And it was the starting point for me to make contacts, to network, and to really start to feel like this is what I want to do.
So the cafes, I'm interested in how you activated them and what the scale of that was.
So at the time, we just had the first episode ever of War and Waste on ABC TV. So for those who don't know, it's been a sort of a landmark TV show in Australia, based loosely, I think, on the War on Waste that was on the UK. And Craig Rucastle and Loon Media and the ABC collaborated on this wonderfully accessible show that's talked about the scale of the problems, but also what can be done at all levels, government, industry and community. And I think it was the first time that Australia, had a lens put up to it in sort of my era. I know that we grew up with Clean Up Australia Day and certainly those sort of campaigns, but it was, I think, a lot more about not just picking up rubbish, but actually, guys, we're consuming too much and we're creating too much. This is the problem, not putting it in the right bin. So we had the benefit of the fact that community awareness was raised anyway. So we also knew of a wonderful campaign that had started in the eastern suburbs of Sydney called Responsible Cafes, back off the campaign by a bunch of people who used to go running on the beach. They were called the Responsible Runners, and they used to pick up rubbish. So Responsible Cafes had started. They had a few thousand cafes around Australia, and we thought, instead of starting something new, why don't we just amplify that campaign in our community? And we really didn't have any cafes in our area at all that were participating. So we used to just go to cafes all around the suburbs in our local council area, tell them about the campaign, give them some information and ask them to be part of it. And so in a very short amount of time, we had 200 cafes signed up, and it was incredibly powerful way of just getting that awareness and getting people to start thinking about it at a very local level.
So from starting with a fruit and veg co-op with your neighbour, things started to blow up, and there was a bit of attention that got paid to this.
Yeah, so I remember we had been going to a lot of events, and Karina, as I said, is just the most encouraging and supportive friend and person. And she'd be like, come on, let's go to this. And I remember one particular day she said, come to this conference, it'll be great. And I was really tired and, young family, lots of stuff going on in my personal life. And I said, I really don't want to go. And I remember it was a plastics conference. And to this day, I still remember some of the people that I met in that room. Natalie Isaacs was there from 1 Million Women, and we met a wonderful gentleman from the ABC who'd been working on their show on the War on Waste, and he was talking about the impact of this show. And we got chatting to him and talking about our campaign, and he was like, I love what you're doing. This is awesome. This is what we need in every community. We needed, a Joe and Karina doing their thing and making it relevant to the people, speaking, with your people and being out there. Would you like to be part of something in the future if there's a second series of War on Waste? And we're like, okay. And I was feeling really ghastly, but I remember thinking, I'm really glad I came tonight because this feels like a really formative, moment. So yeah, we got to be part of the second series of War on Waste, and all of a sudden people were saying, yeah, can you come and do something with our community? Can you come out and speak at this event? And I felt like, even though for all this time I'd been working unpaid, still doing part-time work in other roles that weren't really what I wanted to do, I felt like, okay, there's this something that maybe this could be something I could work on, be paid to do, and wouldn't that just be a wonderful thing? And that was the start of Good for the Hood.
And so, this role with ABC, I've got here impact advisor. Is that a good way of?
So I was part of the impact team. So War on Waste is one of those shows that is put on by the factual team, and they have often an impact campaign that's associated with it, which just means you're raising awareness about the show. If there's actions or calls to action, you're encouraging people to get involved. Maybe there's an education component that goes along with the show that goes into schools or different groups in the community. So my role was to help with producing some of the impact pre and post the show, particularly post, because that's when you start to see those bubbling of, exactly like it happened for us, those sort of ideas of maybe we could get involved, people starting to put on events, viewing nights, people getting out there and trying to use the momentum of the show to sort of create change. So I was lucky to work with a lot of community groups, just like what Corinne and I had started doing, to help them access resources, link up with other people, connect with other campaigns, and just really amplify everyone's efforts. So it felt like a collective movement, not just a whole bunch of sort of little things that people were trying to do.
So when you, when we spoke about this the first time, you mentioned that as you in your own community group started to take action, there was some press coverage that came up, Sydney Morning Herald, all sorts of things, and then this pretty material role with the ABC. How did you feel? Was that, was it, yeah, cool, I'm rolling with it? Or was there, what am I doing? How's this playing
absolutely.
out?
At no point in this second part of my career have I ever felt like that I should be there, or that I always feel a bit of that imposter syndrome. I guess the good part about me is that I actually love to be terrified. And so
an adrenaline junkie.
I think I am, and I love growth. So I'm constantly pursuing, how can I get better at this? How can that didn't go so well, what could I do differently? I love self-improvement. So for me, I will throw my hat in the ring. So there was an opportunity to be on Q&A, live TV, panel chat. It's pretty full on. There's nowhere to hide. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. But inside, I'm going through a divorce. I've got young kids. I'm reasonably anxious. It was a lot, but I did feel lit up. I just felt like this, and I felt different. I felt like, all of the stuff I'd been through in the years before, it was kind of worth it, because I felt like I was growing and I was definitely aligning with the things that I was passionate about. And I felt like I never feel like I'm making a difference, but at least I felt that I wasn't part of the problem as much. I felt like it's good to focus on the solution, but sometimes it's just good to not be making the problem worse. And sometimes I feel like if we all just stop making the problems worse, then maybe that's enough of some of the solutions as well. So I just felt like at least I'm talking about it, I'm amplifying.
You're role modelling.
And I'm agitating, and sometimes that's what's required. So I felt lit up, and I still feel lit up. Honestly, that feeling has not changed. I feel a lot more settled in other aspects of my life, but I definitely felt like this is what I was meant to be doing.
Incredible. Pivoting back to War on Waste, there was a toolkit that you guys developed. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we've now been involved with 2 series of War on Waste, and also the Fight for Planet A, Our Climate Challenge, which was the climate series that Craig Rucastle and Loon Media did with ABC as well. Same format, but about, energy, food, and transport. So looking at those topics and what the average Australian industry and government can do. And so we've developed toolkits at each point for those shows, part of the impact production, which people can access to go, all right, I feel like I want to do something. Where do I start? Again, looking very much beyond just what's happening in your household, about that collective action. So how can you take what you are already doing at home and amplifying that with neighbours, friends, community groups, schools, workplace, just to sort of get a slightly larger circle of influence, and using those positive solutions to model, create conversations, get those so that, we can take this moment when it is in the consciousness of people to maybe move the dial a bit more. And that's exactly what those series have done. Consistently, they have led to changes at all levels of government. They've led to, changes in behaviours within the Australian public. And, they're really powerful mechanisms for change.
So that persistence of the change, can we dig into that a little bit more? So obviously there's big moments capture people's attention. Does it persist, particularly in the community and in people's behaviour?
Yeah, I think it does. I think sometimes it's not an initial change. I always think that there's sort of a 3-month sort of arc of that where it almost the change takes a little while to set in. And then I think you think about personal behaviour, it either sticks or it doesn't. So those habits can shift on a personal level. If we talk about just coffee cups, for example, people can do it for a while and they can slip back. So that definitely happens. You can have a boomerang effect sometimes, particularly if you go into a place and you try to change stuff and you do it in a way that gets people's back up. You can actually make the problem worse. So I guess it's a little bit about the way you do it. But what we have tended to see is that it's raised the conversation, and there's a perceived social license change as well within industry and government. So I see from the outside looking in that each time these businesses have been called out or something's been elevated to government, that there has been some movement, and I do think it has helped push the conversation a little bit further than, and that has where you do see lasting impact. So if an industry changes packaging, for example, or if they change how they're doing, the most recent episode of War and Race has talked to, Coddies about their packaging, and I know that they were planning to change anyway, but I know that they've put out a lot of stuff saying, oh yeah, we're going to do this, it's happening. So that's when you can see sort of in a systems change environment a lot more systemic change, because they've recognised that a lot of people have either written emails or they've seen this conversation and they're like, hey, you need to change that. And the same with government. It's sometimes a bit slower, but you do see, we've seen in New South Wales since the first War and Waste series, plastic bag bans. We've seen changes in single-use plastic that you can use and sell. And, we have had these shifts that are happening. So it's not just to do with the show, but I definitely think it's helped just move things along a bit.
I'm keen to drill in onto that concept around social license and how it drives systemic change. But before we do that, let's close out on Good for the Hood. This early experience with the community and then with the ABC experience, how did that shape the direction you took Good for the Hood?
So Good for the Hood continues to this day. It's now 6 years. We had our 6th birthday in May this year.
Congrats.
Thank you. So I still call ourselves a startup. Karina has gone on to now be working in the conservation space, and she's doing some amazing things still around our local community, and we're still neighbours. Our kids go to school together, and it's really special to still have her there. But she left Good for the Hood, so I was left holding the baby, as a lot of founders are. But it's continued. I've got a small team, lots of consultants that work with me. It's all female-led. We've really been able to work with some pretty cool projects. I've just finished some work with Sydney Water on their purified recycled water campaign, and starting that conversation with Sydney communities about the future of water resilience. I'm working with a council in Sydney about a FOGO and educating the community and getting their community champions involved. So FOGO is food organics, garden organics collection. So getting food out of landfill, reducing the methane. and really it's a huge climate action. Food waste is a huge driver of climate change. So some really cool projects, worked with some big multinationals, spoken at a lot of events, and there's never a normal project for me. And if something comes across and would you do this? Love it. Awesome. Yes. If it's, aligned with what we're good at and it's an outcome that will help climate change, then I'm there. And so we're really, I think it draws back all the time back to those tenets of community first, about what builds resilience within community. So not just the environmental, but the social as well. And using local voices and local messaging and, local connections to educate, inform and sort of bring up people's behaviour, because a lot of the things we're talking about are behind closed doors. They're in your home. No one's telling you where to buy your energy, what to put in the bin, how you get to work, which transport you take, all those things. They're very personal decisions that we make every day. But when you've got, positive influences and you've got a lot of good information, it can make the job easier.
So let's talk about that. So you've mentioned local councils, you've mentioned some multinationals. How do you navigate partnerships between what happens at the community group level to local council or large industry? So
I just take a systemic systems approach to everything. It's one of those things. Sometimes the best way to approach something is at the grassroots level, because you need to reach people, you need them to get buy-in, you need to not necessarily get everyone, but you need a good portion of trusted messengers within the community to get on board. You need to go to people where they are. Sometimes there's no other way to do it than to turn up at the church on a Tuesday afternoon and have a meeting with the senior citizens group. And I still do stuff like that all the time, because that works and it's important, and there's no quick, everyone would love if there was just a quick syringe that you could get done, fixed it, they got the message. It's not. It's really hard work and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So sometimes you've got to do that. Sometimes the problems we're trying to solve at a community level are better solved up the line though. So if we don't have a particular waste stream or a particular emissions that we have to get rid of down here because the industry group have fixed it up here, great. That's a much better way to fix it. Yeah, so much is put on the end of the line. So what we put in our bins and fixing the emissions once they've already been created. There is absolutely a role, for really strong industry leadership and also good government legislation and mandates. So, sometimes it's working with those areas as well. And, but I think for me, I always look at about where we feel our expert skills are. And for me, it's those conversations, building community connections. So if it has a kind of a connection to that, that's where I'll focus. Often I'll be like, you know what, I'm not your person, but I know someone who can help you, because one thing I'm very good at is collecting humans now, and networking is probably one of my superpowers. So I love connecting other people up
Creating
as well.
connections, amazing. It's a powerful skill, particularly in this space. It's amazing actually how many silos still exist, in the business sector. In the
Absolutely. Even in communities, they'll be like, "Oh, have you spoken to and they'll be like, "Oh no," and it's like, and I'm talking about sporting clubs. Like when we're talking about climate change, have you spoken to the local footy club? Like that, why have they not got solar on? These things, and people go, "Oh, I didn't think they'd care." I'm like, no, they don't care about climate change, but they would love to save some money on their energy bill. So it's they're powerful conversations and connections to make.
So let's talk about a specific example about where you've worked with a corporate. So pharmaceutical sector, which came up in one of our early chats. Unlike disposable coffee cups, I imagine trying to drive change to reduce medical waste comes with a ton of complexity.
Yeah, I've been lucky to work with a kind of a collection of people who have a similar interest in the medical technology space and the pharmaceutical sector. So just in the last couple of months, we've been working on an event which was a health technology summit, and it was an environment and health tech summit. So we brought people into the room who had very specific sustainability interests and people who were working in the medical technology space, access, the health economics, understanding the government's policy piece, a lot of research and academics, and got them all in the room and said, right, where is the industry at? What's happening in Australia? What's happening globally? How do we raise the level of ambition? What are the right levers to do that? And kind of my job was to be a bit of an agitator, really, and to bring the expertise of what I've seen in other sectors, but also to help raise the level of interest and probably aspiration. And I think it'll go on to do some really great things. I know that they're looking at planning future events, and we had a huge participation rate and a great representation across the sector. And yeah, I think when you're looking at the level of change that some of those multinational companies can be involved in, it's huge. We're talking about like 7% of Australia's emissions connected to the health sector. Globally, it's a little bit more, but that's pretty. And they all freely said, you know what, we could do more. Like, we are so focused on providing safe, quality healthcare, and that's great. But what's safe, quality healthcare in a world where the climate's actually making our health worse? So there's this conversation about you can't have good healthcare without a safe climate. And I guess for me, it was the perfect space because I could draw back onto all the experience I had in my previous career. And it was the first time I was like, you know what, that all makes sense to me now. So I feel like maybe there hasn't been a design, but maybe it's coming full circle now.
Oh God, circularity. Let's not get into that. So interventions in that context. So you're talking about follow-on events. What are some structural things that might be happening at a government level or otherwise at an industry level that might shift the needle on this?
So the discussion at a federal level is about what to do with health and climate policy, and there has been an absolute ambition to combine the two. So we can't have one without the other, and so the federal government's position has been that health policy needs to be aligned with sustainability or climate, and that recognition is there. And I think most health groups, Doctors for the Environment, they freely acknowledge that climate change and burning of fossil fuels is a huge health risk, not to mention all the other problems that come from, big weather and air quality changes and, floods, fires, droughts, all the things that are associated, and access to clean, fresh water. All of these are huge health crises. Supply chain disruption, we saw it through COVID. We're seeing it at the moment with, IV fluids. Our global system and providing safe healthcare relies on a safe climate. So I think the federal piece is definitely there. As always, the devil's in the detail, and I think the sector is quite interested in what that means and whether they'll be using levers like the health technology assessment to mean that, when decisions are made about what you fund, is the climate part of that conversation. And I guess the fear for some is that if you make it too complex, you can actually make providing access harder. So patient groups and companies are just concerned that there'll be more sort of hoops to jump through.
So specifically, this is procurement of medicine, equipment?
Yeah, more sort of the larger tech equipment, and but it's basically all parts of what's funded within our public health space. So it's huge implications. There are lots of other ways to do this as well, and I think as an industry, there's levels of ambition that are really exciting as well. And what you're seeing is in some of the companies when they're looking at asthma puffers, the huge effort that's gone into changing the propellants in those, because 70% of some of the big companies that produce puffers, inhalers, their emissions are coming from those puffers. Wow. Because it's such a potent greenhouse gas, just making. So every time anyone uses a puffer, they're a huge contributor to climate change. So changing the propellants in those, packaging around whether we move away from blister packs
Pills,
and those sorts of things. Again, really sort of down the level of impact. Maybe everyone will be like, oh, it's pretty small, but it all adds up. And also it's that what people see at home. So there's a level of social license that's changing around what's an acceptable level of waste. But I think ultimately no one's ignoring the fact that plastics in healthcare have a role, but they've also kind of got out of hand a little bit, I think, like most use of plastics. And to be honest, we need to look at the whole gamut of the supply chain as well, because we're refrigerating items, to come into Australia. Some things have to be flown here. There's a huge logistical footprint in terms of ordering items when they're delivered, all of those. So as a sector, it's hard. But yeah, I'm glad to be part of at least some of the change that I'm sure will be seen there.
Butterfly effect of early action.
A little bit, yeah.
Love it, love it. So let's talk about signal and noise. So, we've talked about community activation, this concept of social license. It'd be good to unpack that, specifically around this concept around noise starting to signal to government or to corporate that things need to change or that things can change.
Yeah, I think it's the role of a great activist or a community, agitator, really. It's what lobbyists do at a different level. I think the beautiful thing about community voices is done well, it can really be a very positive thing for communities. I think we have a really concerning lack of civic engagement in Australia, a lot of mistrust. I love politics. I love understanding how changes are. I think there's nothing more amazing than understanding how a system works and being engaged with that system. And I find anyone who says, oh, I don't like politics, they mean they don't like political parties, and that's not politics. For me, politics is the act of creating change, and that's something that we should absolutely be engaged with. It's not about picking a side, but it's about engaging with whoever's there at the time and, letting them know and letting them communicate with you. It's a two-way street about what's happening. And I think it's powerful to express interest and concerns, especially with industry as well, that you don't like something or that this doesn't seem right or I don't understand this, can you explain it to me better? I think that's important, and I think we should be demanding a better level of explanation on some things, and we should also be having dialogues with local councillors, state, federal members, with companies as well. So I'm a very engaged citizen. I also know it doesn't take a lot of kind of noise to signal that something's in the community that's not okay with this. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will act on it, and sometimes noise can be the other way too. I mean, we can see the opposition to renewables in communities, and we can see that people can really drum up a whole lot of outrage. So it needs to be done, fairly and equitably, and also allow people to be engaged in those decision-making processes.
What's the threshold, at various levels?
So I think it doesn't take much for a company to take notice. I mean, I've heard the number, and I don't know if it's how true it is, but I've heard that 20 emails to a company about something and they start to go.
As a former CEO, 5 is plenty, particularly from some key customers.
Yeah. So, I've always said to people, don't underestimate the fact that all your emails get read. Even if it's not read by the person you've written to, it will be read by someone. So I think I've always said this, that I think you should still do it. And I think people do it sometimes. They write an email to an MP or to a company and they're like, well, I just got that, cookie cutter response and nothing's changed. That's okay. They've still heard you. And you don't know how many other people, and I think there is a barometer. They can feel the heat. And, maybe it's a little bit of heat, maybe it's a lot of heat, you just don't know. And I just think it's important that you are vocal in that respect. I think also the interaction needs to be respectful. I also think it needs to be balanced, because if you come across as an extremist or aggressive, then you will be dismissed and your message will get lost. So I do think it's about being, civil and being engaged but not aggressive. And I think that that's important in any sector if you're trying to create change, because you don't want to be dismissed because you're crazy or, an angry weirdo. So
no tinfoil hats.
Yeah, no. And I do think because it weakens your message, right? It's very hard to minimise someone who's come out with facts, with credible information or just genuine concern, and if you're sincere, and I always say be a normal, just show up and just, hey, I'm not here with any other vested interest, but I'm really concerned about this. That's really powerful. So I think we need to do more of that at all levels, industry, government, and just be engaged and know about what's happening. And I think the easiest way to do that sometimes is local council. Councils are incredibly quick at being able to change things. Yes, it's a level of, roads, rates, rubbish, but it's also a great way to understand what's happening and how change can happen in a community. And I think for me, it's exactly how I started to learn about all of this and how I first got involved. So I do think it's powerful to start there. And you're very close to the action. You will get a response from your councillor and it'll probably be pretty quick. And there's a few of them you can harass too, sometimes 12. So, it's good. It's a good place to start.
That's a powerful message. Small things add up. If we flip it around the other way, so let's say I'm a large supermarket chain trying to shift to paper bags. How do I read the barometer? Or is it something that you help organisations with, reading the barometer or trying to plant the seeds for change? I had David Ritter, CEO of Greenpeace, on the podcast yesterday. He was talking about the campaign they mounted to shift beef consumption away from forestry and land clearing impacts. And it came out that yesterday Woolworths or Coles, I can't remember which, made a call that they wouldn't be buying beef from those sources anymore. That's a big call for a supermarket chain to make. It impacts the suppliers. The suppliers will absolutely give noise back. How do you, with supplier groups or with the public, how do you navigate that? Or is that something you've supported organisations with?
A little bit. I think it's obviously, it can get murky, particularly in a private company, because you don't know what pressures that they are reading from. So obviously they have shareholder interests, and if you're a shareholder within those companies, hey, guess what? There's another way you can agitate for change. So I guess they're reading a whole bunch of room. I think good leaders don't wait for the noise. They can sort of, start to anticipate where things are going. Obviously, there's a lot of issues that people can be outraged by, let's be honest, especially when it comes to a supermarket. We all go there. We all have contact with it. We all hate parts of it.
Tough job.
It is. And, but they also have a monopoly and they also have a huge footprint, and a huge capacity to completely shift the supply chain when it comes to. I think there's a lot of things that we as citizens and customers don't see. So we can't be expected to be the prodding for change, because there's things we just don't know. We don't see the scale of food waste that comes out of supermarkets, for example, but I know that some of the supermarkets have done a huge amount of work in that space, managing that, because A, it's the right thing to do, B, it saves them a lot of money, and C, it can help the partners that they're working with and other organisations as well. So, in theory, it's the right thing to do, whereas we wouldn't necessarily always know that what's happening in that space. So I think when it comes to campaigns, and obviously, when you've got a collective group like Greenpeace or others, Conservation Foundation, others that are kind of leading that, I'm sure the companies would be taking a lot of notice about that, because they will be getting a lot of heat, press, very effective. But I do think it's that, do you lead or do you kind of wait for the moment? And I think it's the same with any emissions targets, or whether you decide to be a B Corp, or whether how you decide to treat your employees, or they're decisions that you make based on the values that you have as a leader. And I think and as an executive group. So I do think there's a level of like, all right, what is our tolerance for doing the right thing? What is the right thing as far as we're concerned? And yeah, when do we move based on what people's feedback as well? But I think you're right, it doesn't take a lot of noise for people to start at least examining the issues. And yeah, my encouragement to organisations would be to listen. I mean, if I can use an example, Coke and a lot of the beverage companies in Australia, the biggest opponents to the container deposit scheme for many, many, many years. Flip to now in 2024, some of the biggest supporters of the container deposit scheme because they've seen what it's done for their industry. They've partnered up with competitors and they've said, yeah, actually we want this. We want more of you to do this. So that's
container deposits, that's taking your
bottles
stuff
and cans, yeah.
to a local recycler.
Complete about turn. And they sort of say, you know what, yeah, we probably got that wrong. But so it's one of those things, it can change. And I think that took a lot of community campaigning as well, and eventually it took the government just to do it. But yeah, I think sometimes it is about maybe waiting for the right moment. I think sometimes it's about not waiting too long.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's, if we think about a concrete example, wind, right? Like wind power, wind generation, there are some really interesting pushback. So companies are trying to drive this change in communities. There's pushback against renewables in some parts of rural Australia. How do you navigate that? Is that?
Yeah, I think there is some pushback. There's also some huge supporters. I think there's a very vocal opposition, and like all things, vocal opposition can be small but mighty. I think I grew up in country New South Wales. I grew up on a property that now has a large solar farm there. My family haven't owned it for a long time, but I do know when I visited that it is a very different looking property to what it once was. And I've even spoken to my mum and dad about it. And I sort of said, what do you think? And mum said, I don't really like it. It's not, I don't really like the way it looks. And I said, yeah, I get that. It's change. It's big change and it's scary. People don't necessarily dislike change, but they do worry about what it means. So I think we do need to understand what's happening to these communities. A lot of them feel it's being put on them. I do think there needs to be some really heartfelt listening going on, and that comes with early. If you're going to do these projects, you get in really early with the community. You build the connections. You engage over a long period of time, and you don't leave once a thing's built. You build jobs, you build benefits, you make sure people are compensated. So there's ways of doing it. I think the problem with the climate crisis is that we need to move quick. So, we got this sort of really tough friction between we need this to happen, we need the energy transition to happen, but we also want to support these communities and make sure they're not left behind or disadvantaged. So I think it's like any change. It's a change management exercise. It's slow. It can be tedious. It can be problematic. And you're not going to get everyone on board. No one's ever agreed. Like living in a community, people don't agree to put in a car park or to put a footpath in it. So of course there's going to be opposition. Opposition's okay. I think you've got to bring people in part of the story. And unfortunately in Australia, we do see that climate change and renewables are very much politicised, and it is this side versus this side. And that I think that's a real shame, because I actually think the benefit is somewhere in the middle. Makes a ton
of economic sense, right?
But I do think we do need to respect the communities and farmers and families that are going through this. My dad put up an opposition to transmission lines years ago. He led a community campaign against it, which didn't end up proceeding. I don't know if it was much to do with that or just the time it wasn't needed. So I can understand it. But I guess then we didn't know why they were doing it or what they were trying to achieve. So I do think you have to give people the big picture. And the communities where we're wanting to put these renewables, they're going to be the hardest hit by climate change. So I don't know how many of them really fully understand what the impact of, in some of these communities, projected up to 4 degrees warming in some of these farms. That's catastrophic. Like we can't, so I think it's about, making sure that we're doing it side by side a bit. It's not, hey, you're bad, I'm good, even though I talk about good for the hood a lot. I think it's actually about what do you need to make this work for you? How can we do this with you? How can we make sure there's jobs here for you? How can we make sure that the community benefits as much as the person who's built the asset? Absolutely. That's what it comes down to. That's what it is.
It's just good, right?
It's just good.
It's just we talk about just good business. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot on the business side. Let's turn to the human side before we close out.
My favourite side.
People.
So
we've seen a rise in anxiety. You mentioned anxiety earlier in your journey, and particularly among young people around climate change. How do we better channel that anxiety into constructive action, particularly at a local level?
So I think the first thing is to call it what it is, give it a name. I think once you acknowledge that you are anxious, you understand why you feel so yuck. And so I think giving it a name and then recognising, is it something that you can do something about, or is it just something you have to endure for a bit? And I think sometimes some of the things we hear and feel are just write it out. There's nothing I can do right now that's going to make it necessarily any better. But if I just work on, my own resilience, then that's what I need to focus on. But there are lots of times where we have a feeling or we see something and then we're like, I should really do that. And it can kind of move into the guilt phase if we don't action it. So I think I talk to a lot of people about the fact that, you acknowledge what it is and then you actually decide whether you're going to address it or not. Is it something I'm going to do something with? Yes. Okay, I'm going to put some time in my diary and that's the moment of which I'm going to do that thing that I've been thinking about, whether it's write that email or look up some quotes for solar or, explore that business opportunity that I've finally been thinking about. Then making some time to work on the thing that's been ruminating for you and then do it. So, and I think action is the antidote. I know that myself. I don't actually get anxious the way I used to get about climate, which is so weird because I know way more than I did then and it's not going to be particularly better. So it's purely the fact that I know that working in this space is the antidote for me feeling anxious. I think I would feel way worse if I was still doing my old job or just sort of pushing that feeling away. I think facing it head on, meeting great people in the space, seeing the solutions that are there, seeing the opportunities, it's hella exciting. I mean, you don't need to come to Greenhouse or to be around other startups or smart people or connections and very supportive people to go, wow, there's some amazing people, some wonderful solutions, and how can you not get excited by that? So I think it is that active hope is being the doing bit will help with the rumination and the anxiety. But I think also for our kids who are a lot less able to maybe go out and do, and I have a 12-year-old who hasn't really expressed much concern yet, but I know that he will. I think it's acknowledging it and just saying it's okay. You have every right to feel anxious. And in fact, there are people in this world who deserve to feel a lot more anxious, and it's on them, not you. You're not the sick one. You're not. And I think that understanding that other people feel this too, it's a legitimate and very reasonable experience. So acknowledge and accept, but also act.
So on that point, what advice do you have for anyone listening who wants to make a difference but doesn't know where to start? What can they do that's good for their hood?
I would start where your passion lies. So I always ask people, what do you do in your spare time? What's your thing? What do you get excited about? What do you talk about? If we were here to sit and just had, a couple of hours to sit and chat, what would you talk about with me? What do you love? And people go, I'm just really into, this fungi at the moment. Like I'm just really or I've been exploring, the Swedish study of, people have really interesting niches, right? And so it's not necessarily that you apply that passion as a sort of a cookie cutter into climate action. But there's a reason you like those things. So when you ask yourself, well, why do I like that? It's like, well, I love I'm really curious. I love nature and natural systems, and I'm really curious about those, and I want to find out more. Or I like feeling part of something bigger. I just love knowing that I'm a tiny little speck as part of all these other systems. Or I love researching stuff because I just love finding out more. Or I love saving money because I can see it and I can action it and it gives me control and I can. So once you start unpacking why you like something, you can realise what is in that for you in terms of climate action. And I say very strongly, please make sure that whatever you do gives you something back, because the burnout that we see within activists and conservationists and environmentalists and anyone trying to change a system is immense. And I don't believe that it should be costing us more than we're able to give, because that in itself is unsustainable. And we're trying to talk about getting balance into the system and regenerating, those natural processes. We are part of it. So I think it's critical that you find something that gives you something back, whether that's enjoyment, whether it's belonging, whether it's connection, whether it's, paying your bills at the end of the week, whatever it is that can make you feel like this is not a one-way street. And often it is having a really cool community and a bit of a tribe around you that you feel like, I know that even on my hard days I can have a coffee or have a beer and I'll be all right. I think it is about just having something, because if you pour everything of you into something, and it's only so long you can do that. And I do think that being a martyr in this space is not actually going to work. We need people who can do this for a long time and who don't burn themselves out and get angry and bitter, even though anger and bitterness are totally legitimate emotions sometimes. We still need relationships to thrive. And I always say to people, I don't want to live in a community that's solved climate change, but we all hate each other and want to kill each other anyway.
All the rage, all the time.
Yeah, so I don't also want to live in a community that has no social cohesion, that we all fighting. That's not sustainable either. So I think we need to make sure that our social systems and our environmental systems survive, and that means looking after ourselves as well. So find your passion, apply that in a way that's going to give you something back. And, also it doesn't mean you have to shift. I threw all my toys out of the cot and started again, but you don't have to do it that way. You can be an entrepreneur in your own current job. You can agitate with your boss. You can talk to your co-workers. You can be an activist from your computer at home in an evening. You can join your local, Surfers for Climate or Vets for Climate or Doctors for the Environment. There are special interest groups in I'm sure there's real estate agents for the environment somewhere. I don't know, I haven't found them yet, but find your special interest group that's linked with, climate group, and that's where you can really do some really cool industry and professional things as well. So, don't overcomplicate it. Just find what makes you feel like your contribution is going to work, and lean into the things that you enjoy. Life's too short to hate this, so you should at least get a little bit of joy at the same time as doing some good.
It's not you against the world. I love that, and that's struck me. I'm fairly new to the climate community, and it's amazing how supportive it is. How much it helps you to nourishes you, I suppose, in the activity that you're doing. What opportunity do you think is being left on the table in climate? You deal with a lot of businesses, a lot of governments.
I think we are not telling enough of the good, positive benefits of acting quickly and what the solutions can really hold. It's often after people get solar that they go, I've saved some money. I didn't realise, or, once they've got an EV that they realise actually it's quieter and I don't have as much, it's not as smelly. We should be talking about the fact that a decarbonised future is really good.
Nice.
It's bloody good. It's actually, and the quicker we move, the easier it's going to be. So I think we are missing out. I think to tell you who's doing it really well is fossil fuel companies are doing a great conversation about what they're doing in this space. We need to be telling stories about renewables. We need to be talking to farmers who are embracing the change and having success. We need more people to experience the benefits, because it's really hard to hate something once you've had a positive experience with it. And I'm not saying that everyone can necessarily experience these things, but I just don't think we're telling enough of the right stories. And I think now that we've got some, really big concerns around greenwashing, people are even more hesitant to communicate in a way that could be misconstrued as, sort of greenwashing. Yeah. So I think there's a place for good, and that's why communities are great, because people when you talk to your neighbours or friends and whatever, and you say, oh yeah, I just got a heat pump hot water, it's great, or yeah, I've got my new EV, love it, never had a better car. Like, they are actually really useful stories. So talk more about the positive of the solutions. It's much more easy to win that war than to try and convince people of climate change and the pressing. That doesn't motivate people in the same way as, hey, I've got a great new car and it's wonderful, So I think talking about solutions is where I want to see a lot more.
Solutions and benefits, I suppose, and real world benefits.
Yeah.
And final question, any advice for others thinking of taking the leap to start a business to address climate?
Don't do it while you're going through a divorce. No, I thought about this a lot. A lot of people said to me, don't start a business now. It's the wrong time. You don't know what you're doing. If there's a will, there's a way. And if your passion is strong enough and it's embedded in the things that you're good at and that you deeply believe in, that fire in your belly, you'll make it work. So a lot of people are worried because they don't. I've literally had no investment of funding in my business. I'm not in debt. I've been able to pay myself a wage every year, and I've got a great team. I'm very, very small steps in terms of growing my business. But my idea has never been to build something big, flash in the pan, and jump out. I've wanted this for life. This is my my legacy. But I think there's a lot of concerns, and obviously do all your due diligence, but at some point you're just going to have to rip off the Band-Aid and do it. And I think if your passion's there and you've got good support and good advice, you'll be fine. And if it fails, so be it. You got to fail, and you will fail. Do it quickly, change, learn, and keep going. And if it's not the right thing, then look what you've got. But I think you have to be really comfortable with either accepting that you're going to fail or accepting that you're actually never going to start. And I know what I'd be more comfortable with.
What an amazing place to finish. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Once again, if you like listening today, then please subscribe to The Climatalist wherever you get your podcasts, and give us a follow on Instagram, where we're just Climatalist. I'm Anton. Thanks for listening.